Okay, should we all, are we all good? Okay, let's all stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
President Daly?
Here.
Vice President Headland?
Here.
Trustee Clements? Here. Trustee McNowell? Here. And Trustee Parr is absent.
Okay, at this time I'm going to open the public hearing for our district safety and emergency management plan and turn it over to Dr. Benante for any discussion.
I don't have extensive comments as this document's been before the board for some time. Really tonight there's a procedural element that we want to make sure we attend to, and that the district-wide safety and emergency management plan has been posted publicly. It's been available for public comment really since mid to early August, I should say early to mid-August. We're at the point now where we need to have the public hearing to, as required by law, to invite any other further public comment on the document before you act upon it. So really with that, if anybody would like to provide comment on the document, now would be the time to do so.
Can I have a question?
Sure.
In rereading through this, one of the things I'm interested in, I don't know whether it falls here or falls someplace else, is how does the plan, or what plan talks about incidents that happen when students are off campus? So if there's an emergency that is either with the students are away, field trip, sports event, something, or that involves the campus when the students are away and in transition back, how do we consider that, and how does that work?
So as part of our regular emergency planning, that's a good example of something we would discuss through our trainings that take place at a building level. So Alteris works with other law enforcement agencies and emergency response agencies to provide ongoing trainings at the building and district level. And we would talk about such a scenario there. The protocol, whenever our students are off campus, there's a clear delineation of who is the person in charge of that particular event. Okay. And then obviously back on site here, we are aware of who's off campus for what. Right. So whether it be athletic events or field trips, right, et cetera. And essentially there's a chain of command that's established between us here who remain on site and whoever is off site, right, to help coordinate in an emergency scenario. But the specifics can really vary, yeah, sure, right, depending on where you are and what's going on, everything from being in the middle of the woods down to the heart of New York City. Right. So those scenarios we review or plan for somewhat routinely each year, never knowing really what could come up, right, but at least having a level of readiness to respond to a variety of situations if and when they do. Okay. So I would point to just the required training, right, components of the plan in response to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can close the public hearing.
So this will be on later on, yep, for adoption for our board.
Great.
Okay.
The first thing I want to share is that our next Board of Education meeting, it will be on Tuesday, October 1st, 7 p.m. right here, room 211, our new board meeting home. The other thing I want to share that's not on the agenda, but the Haldane School Board has been working with the Garrison School Board to find effective collaboration opportunities, and we're really excited that we have come up with a retreat to do together. So a retreat is basically professional development for the board. And both the Haldane School Board and the Garrison School Board are both interested in adopting a self-evaluation tool, which we'll be talking about later and is on our board goals. And so is Garrison. So we're going to together work with NYSSBA to do a retreat to learn about the self-evaluation tool. And we'll be doing that at the end of November. So we're all really excited about it. We wanted to share that with the public, and we think it's a great way for us to continue deepening our relationship with our neighbors. It's going to be at Winter Hill. That's a new development for the school board, and we've confirmed the date with NYSSBA, so it's set, and the time is 10 to 2. So we're looking forward to that.
I think I proposed this as an opportunity, and I did it after attending last year's NYSSBA conference, where I saw the man who I think often leads those sessions, and I was just really impressed by him. So I don't know who will lead it, but I have high hopes for it.
Yeah, and the NYSSBA, we use the NYSSBA tool for our evaluation of the superintendent. So I imagine it's a similar tool, but that tool has been incredibly easy to learn, effective. So I'm looking forward to it. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Benante for his comments.
Thank you, Ms. Daly. I have a few areas I want to address, one of which I'll turn over to Ann. But to start, one of our trustees had reached out and expressed interest in attending one of our curriculum nights, which I thought was wonderful. But it prompted the discussion about whether or not the board is interested in the administration organizing a walkthrough of our schools, whether it be by level, the elementary level, middle, and high school, to provide an opportunity for our board members to see what's going on in our classrooms, to meet with our building administrators or other department heads, talk about various district initiatives and what their experiences are with the school, success, maybe areas that maybe are in need of further attention. I can see as a trustee why there may be a desire to do that, and then certainly on the administrative end, we're happy to coordinate. So before we got any further into that discussion, I figure this is a good discussion to have as a board or with the board, and then get some direction, and we can go ahead and start coordinating that if the board felt it would be helpful.
So we have a policy that we have that's intended to be just a walkthrough of the
Right.
of the physical plant once
Yep.
a year. That's something we need to do. I think that's something that would really, that's also always a nice event in and of itself, but having the other components, I think, would really liven it up. I mean, for the administrators, what they do is up to them, but to highlight maybe, products that appear in some kind of class or, other activities, I think that would be great. Especially for someone like me who's never in the schools anymore.
And we were talking about those as two separate things. The facilities walkthrough is one thing that we hope to schedule once we have a new facilities director. We felt like that might make sense. And then the building walkthroughs would be more driven by the principals, and talking more about like programming and the student experience and
Just the opportunity to understand the difference between a blue day and a white day, I think would be phenomenal.
Mrs. Sniffen would love to talk about that with you.
No, but I think it'd be great.
I was the person that asked about curriculum night initially, and that was because a teacher had come to me and said, "Are you going to curriculum night?" And I was like, "I don't know if I am supposed to go to curriculum night. Let me check and see." Knowing so many of the kids in the high school and knowing a lot of the teachers there, I felt like, oh, is there a moment? Is there a time when it would be nice in our capacity as board members to travel together and sort of say hello without disturbing the educational process by any means.
and we had talked a little bit about last year. Dr. Benante coordinated. During budget time, we had a presentation from the high school principal, a presentation from the middle school, and it was, one a month. And they were so helpful. They really gave us windows into what's happening in our schools. And we were talking maybe that would be a good time to coordinate, as we hear from the high school principal, also coordinating the high school walkthrough. As we coordinate listening to the middle school presentation, also, doing the walkthrough, so that they're somehow
Was one thought.
connected.
So the
So-
idea isn't a single event, but to have multiple and combine them with the presentations. I like that.
It was an idea.
It was just an idea.
You know, of a way to stagger them and to allow a little bit more time at any one place, but still while being respectful of your time as well. So obviously we're talking about visits that are occurring during the school day, so some may be limited by their schedule. You may not be able to attend all of them. We certainly understand that, but at least it would be an opportunity to start to visit and talk to our administration, and if desired, our teachers as well, as they're available. Again, as Sean noted, with as little disruption as possible to the educational process, I think it would. There's a nice way to do that. We certainly want the board to be attuned to what's going on in the schools and to have that opportunity if so desired. So.
Well, yeah, especially as I think it gives an opportunity to see some of the major district goals that we're trying to progress on, whether it's curriculum, whether it's, and how does that, I mean, yes, it'd be great for me to understand blue and white days, but that's not important. I think it's more important to understand, like, what are we looking to do and how does it actually working from a board and policy perspective.
So it sounds like there's an interest there. Jen and I will continue to talk, obviously, in preparation for board meetings, and perhaps we'll flesh out a little further what this can look like at some point during the school year. All right, thanks for that. So I think it was last week, it seems perhaps ages ago, we received a notice from the county that the tax bill, there was an error at the county level with a calculation that influenced the tax bills that were issued in the community. And the phone has been ringing and has not stopped ringing since that point. And Ann has some information, perhaps can provide a little more detail on what specifically occurred and what the district is doing to correct it. And there is an action on for later this evening that I believe, Ann, you determined was necessary just to make sure that we were on solid ground moving forward. So with that, maybe a brief summary, Ann, and we'll answer any
Sure.
questions that there are.
Later in the agenda, the board will be asked to approve the corrected tax rolls and tax warrant. What happened was that at the county level, there was a computer error that allowed the tax rolls to be calculated with a much larger veterans exemption than the state allows, which means that the veterans received a very reduced tax bill, but that tax burden was shifted to everyone else. So a lot of the community had a higher tax bill than they should have had. Instead of waiting until next year, which was one of the suggestions to just correct it then with a credit or an increase, it was determined that the tax collection would be stopped until new tax bills were printed by the county. They went into the mail yesterday. They are on nice yellow paper so that people can differentiate from their incorrect bill. The due date for not having to pay a penalty has now been pushed to October 21st. We did not, because our tax bills go to a lockbox at M&T in Buffalo, nothing was processed yet. So it's good that we could just mail everyone's bill back to them, their checks that they sent to us. We don't have to wait, and some districts that already processed some payments had to send a refund, and that would have really been a nightmare as well, on top of everything else that's happening. So we're sending back all of the bills and checks that have been paid so far with a letter explaining. The new tax bills should be delivered today and tomorrow, and the tax, we're ready. Everything is loaded into the computer to be able to accept the new tax bills, and that's basically it.
Okay. So the bills are coming. Lastly, I wanted to provide an update on really an overview of the coherence planning process. I think over the course of last year, towards the end of the year, when we started talking about putting some funding in place for this. And through the summer months where we meet less frequently, we've kind of entered, or I've alluded to the coherence planning process, but haven't provided more of a comprehensive overview of what the process entails, and I'll do so this evening for the board. So I do have some slides that I'm going to refer to over the course of my comments, and then obviously there's time for questions as we go along and questions at the end. So first, I want to remind the board and our community members that back in 2014, the district enlisted the support of the Public Education and Business Coalition, PEBC, to draft its strategic plan. And much of the result of that work is still on the district website. It can be accessed on the strategic plan link on the district website. And if folks are interested, there's some artifacts to read, and the goals are listed there as well, which also outlines the work that was completed over the next 5 years in support of each of those goal areas. So there were 10 strategic goals derived from the work of 5 subcommittees that were a part of that work. And those subcommittees focused on college, career, and citizenship readiness, extracurricular programs. There was a subcommittee on facilities, financial strategies, and teaching and learning. So just some background there on that. Over the course of the last school year, really towards the end of last school year, we enlisted the support of Jonathan Costa of an organization called EdAdvance to evaluate the district's previous strategic plan and also to develop a new coherence plan framework. That term coherence is an important term. I'm going to speak more about that in a minute. But I think I want to define, both for the board and for anybody who happens to be watching at home, that we are entering into this in a slightly different way than through coherence planning that is definitively different than strategic planning, traditional strategic planning. There are some elements that are similar, but there are some elements that are very different. I realize, especially over the last couple weeks, that many folks who may have been involved in the previous process have that process in mind as we're engaging in this new process, and there may be a tendency to compare, and I would encourage folks not to compare because they're different processes. So coherence planning is different than traditional strategic planning in that the process is focused on the highest leverage improvement strategies that have demonstrated to have the largest influence on student learning. That's it. There's a simplicity in the process that we're only going to be focused on a very few things and examining our system through all layers and how those systems that our school is a part of or that are influencing our school district, how they are supporting or getting in the way of us being able to complete the highest leverage things or strategies that we know have a positive impact on kids and their learning on campus. So a slightly different way in which to enter into this work. So I would say coherence planning is not about getting a lot of stuff done. It's about getting the right things done. I took this from a different book, but I think that's how we're entering into this, really examining those highest leverage strategies that we know will have an influence on kids and their experience here and making sure we're doing them well and examining our system through that lens. So this is a process that occurs in 5 stages. And this is from Jonathan, our facilitator. And right now we're in the first phase of the process where we're looking to commit to the principles of coherence planning. And we'll process through these 5 other phases in the process, but we're still very early on, very much at a philosophical level right now. And that starts with a coherence planning team. So we selected a coherence planning team based on recommendations from the school administration, the school leadership, and our Board of Education leadership. And the group consists of educators, parents, and community members. And the team will meet continually throughout the fall and winter to develop the coherence plan. The team will also break up into subgroups at some point in the process as we get a little further along. And additional community members may be included as part of that work. That's still yet to be developed, but we can anticipate that happening. And these groups are really focused on what are our goals for learning, examining the teaching for those goals, the measures of learning for the district, supporting systems, again, that are either contributing to student learning on campus, and any external factors that we should be accounting for in that process. I sent something out to the community earlier this week about the coherence planning process and introduced the community to the members of this team. You'll note that it's significantly weighted towards internal community members, meaning folks who are teachers or administrators in our school district. But we do have outside community members who are a part of it as well. Now, an important part of this first phase of the process is the thought exchange. The thought exchange platform is a mechanism to engage the community in a discussion about what we're talking about in the coherence planning framework. And this is slightly different. I would say if folks are kind of comparing previous process to this one don't. It's somewhat apples and oranges, but this is a mechanism that we're utilizing to engage the community more broadly on their thoughts and perspectives about, right now, the most essential skills and attributes every Haldane student will need to be successful in a highly dynamic and changing world. It's not a survey. I think I framed it as that before. I was a bit of a misnomer. It's really it's an engagement platform, and I'm going to refer to it in a moment. Now, an invitation to participate in this thought exchange was sent to all staff 2 days ago, and it was sent to the community at large today. So it's out there. It should be on our website. If it's not on our website today, it will be tomorrow morning. It's also going to be on our district Facebook page. We want as many people as possible to contribute to this conversation. And I'm going to come out of the PowerPoint for a moment just to show what the thought exchange looks like if you haven't seen it yet. Salem, would you mind advancing a couple slides or this for me when we get into it? So bear with us. I'm not. This is the initial platform. So once you log on, this is what you'll see. And you don't need to click join, Chris. But if you go up to the question, there's a question here. What are the most essential skills and attributes every Haldane student will need to be successful in a highly dynamic and changing world? Now, I've already completed this, so you're going to see my platform in here. But you can see there's a little figure of a person there. 41 other people have participated as of this point. So, and they've contributed 50 comments, and then there's ratings, 446 ratings of those comments as we've gone through. So Chris, if you go up to just the question itself and hover over that, you should be able to click on it. Yep. And as Chris does this is the initial login page that most folks will see when they log on. There's an introduction. Tell us about you is just your affiliation to the school district. You're seeing I already completed this. That's why there's green checks there. And then Chris, if you can click on the question one more time, we can now go into the exchange. So this is a point where you can see my work, you can see what everybody else has contributed to the document, or to the exchange, excuse me. Chris, if you click on the top there, you see star. Yep, right there. So this is where I can review other people's comments and essentially rate them. And that's going to be an important part of the process because the most salient points as people are rating, whether it's not agree or disagree, but how those comments or statements resonate with them, the higher the comments with greater resonance will rise to the top. And will be examined. So I've rated 26 comments at this point, or starred 26 comments. I'm not going to do this one, but you'll see that someone posted that they feel the most successful skills and attributes are working on a team and resolving conflicts. Interpersonal skills, no matter what job, even accounting, they think is relevant. So, I would star this example based on how it resonated with me as an individual looking at this. Chris, if you click over now and discover, great. There's some neat features here. Chris, if you just go to all thoughts, the second box there, thanks. This is where we can see everybody's comment. So just scroll down, Chris, and you can see the ratings associated with each one. The higher rated comments are at the top here. Chris, just go ahead and keep scrolling down. Yeah. Let's just stop right there, Chris. So someone listed critical thinking, next compassion towards others and the planet. Keep going, Chris. Critical thinking skills and ability to respectfully challenge the status quo. Keep going. Respect for each other. Critical thinking skills. So you can already start to see that there's a certain theme emerging from the few comments that we've looked at, and that will continue as more people participate. Those themes will gradually emerge through their participation in the process. Chris, if you just go to the last one, yep, the person icon here. Now these are, not to put this out there, but I think it's a safe space. These are my comments. This is what I contributed to the thought exchange.
Ooh,
and
3.9.
I know, I'm not doing so well on that one. But I can see how my comments are resonating with others who've participated in the exchange. Chris, scroll up there. Yeah, so I did all right. So again, I can go back to this as many times as I choose to see how my thoughts are contributing to the dialogue or resonating with our community or not, and that's fine. So we'll list those there. And that's really the exchange. I can go back and contribute more comments upon seeing others. Sometimes it may spur another thought. You know, I read these other comments and that reminded me of something that I didn't include the first time. I can go back in and include another comment if I so choose. So it's again, the exchange piece is important. Again, listing it as a survey or a questionnaire, as I think I did last time, really is a misnomer. As you can see, it's very interactive. And again, this information will be compiled and then turned back over to the Coherence planning team for further discussion and analyzing potentially. Chris, if you wouldn't mind, just for me, if you can, any questions about the thought exchange? I'm sorry, thank you, Chris, before I come out of it.
You said you sent an email to the school community. Is it open to like any taxpayer, really, right? It's not just about people who are parents.
No. So through our listserv, we have 4,000 email addresses, I believe, on that listserv. So our hope is we're hitting some people who have affiliations with the school through that. But it is open to any community member, anybody who has a vested interest in the education that students receive here on campus. So anybody who comes to touch Haldane in some way, shape, or form. So it could be grandparents, it could be parents, it could be, I sent it to the Chamber of Commerce today. So our local business owners, we want the community to answer this question and to share their thoughts related to this question. I shared with, I was meeting with the Arts Alliance earlier and talking about this a bit. A strategic planning and a coherence planning process is as good as the input that is received. So quality input in, quality output. Garbage in, garbage out. So this is a mechanism we're using to connect with the community at large that I think is relatively safe and accessible. It doesn't take much. It takes about 5 minutes to complete. You can put as little or as much thought into it as you want, and it's out there. But that's also why we have it posted on the Facebook page and posted on the district website as other mechanisms for folks who may not be on our listserv, but who may come across it. We would want them to contribute to it.
And I assume too at the upcoming curriculum nights is a good opportunity to plug.
Yeah, so Marianne, I have a slight conflict on Thursday. It's my own child's curriculum night, so Marianne's going to speak to it at that one, and then I'll be at the elementary curriculum night next week. I'm going to speak to it as well. And guide folks to it. And Marianne and I have discussed whether or not it's possible to actually have a section of the school set up, the library with laptops out if folks want to go in before they leave and contribute their thoughts. We're thinking about setting something like that up if we can do so.
Is this a moderated environment? Is there an administrator that controls
Jonathan,
the level of
it's
discourse?
somewhat there's some intuition behind the software, so it screens for certain words.
Okay.
You can't just go on there and cause trouble. But Jonathan moderates it as well, our facilitator. And checking all of them today, of the first 40 so folks who participated, everybody's following directions very well.
I have tons of questions. Sorry. Fascinating, platform to be able to sort of engage in dialogue and sort of cause stuff. How are we thinking about ensuring we have participation across all let's just start with parents of children in the district or parents who may have children in the district to come. Are we going to do any? We're heavily weighted in K through 2, and we need to get some high school. Give me some insights on that.
So for the thought exchange on the front end, when you register, it will ask you to denote: are you a parent?
Yep.
Are you a community member?
So
Are you a
self-reported.
staff member?
Yep. Okay.
So that's one way to discern what was our participation on this. Did we have a lot of parents participating?
Yeah.
Did we have a significant staff participation? On down to examine that.
But only in those buckets, parents.
Only
staff.
in those buckets,
Okay.
correct. Moving forward,
Yeah.
in addition to the thought exchange, we'll also have community forums
Right.
that we're facilitating. I haven't thought about how folks register and whether or not we want to denote their affiliation with the
Right.
school district in a
Right.
particular way, but certainly that would be an opportunity to further examine who is participating in the process and what their affiliation is with the school district and who perhaps, what group are they representative
Right.
of and where there may be a gap.
Right.
Through the Coherence planning team, we did try to be deliberate internally, certainly with representation of staff members across all departments and all
Yeah.
levels. As far as the community groups, while it is limited, we were trying to be deliberate in folks who had elementary age students, middle school age students, high school age students, students who had graduated already in that group as well. So that at base level is how we've tried to account for participation across a wide variety of groups. There are, once I go into the PowerPoint again, I'll speak more to other participation opportunities as well that may have escaped me.
I would just encourage, and maybe Jonathan has experience with it, I would just encourage, having done, tried to do engagement survey stuff, like how many times you need to remind people is a lot. So just thinking about, I noticed in your letter, which is fantastic, is there a deadline? Get your thoughts in by, it's not necessarily clear.
Right.
I'm assuming at some point it will be less useful.
Right.
So if there is a big push that you want to do up front, let's get broad representation across all of our 800 families or whatever that is, right? To put some thought into what's the cadence of outbound communication to make sure you're getting the representative participation in. The other question that I had was a little bit more existential, which is, you talked about it being open to anyone who has an interest in the educational aspect of the district. Is there a universe that we exclude? Could anybody,
Technically, could anybody go on our website, see this link, click on it, and participate?
content, right?
Yeah, they could. It's not contained in that way.
It's not gated.
It's not gated.
Yeah.
I think what we would find
don't think
is that
anybody's
the
gonna do
majority
it.
of the participants are going to be folks who are pretty directly associated with the school district.
Sure.
In the background, it is possible to see where these comments are coming from in terms of township. So if someone from California is participating, we would see that. I wouldn't necessarily be concerned about it. If 300 people from California were participating and we only had 400 responses, I would be concerned.
Grandparents in California.
I would be concerned, right?
Okay. All right.
And this is also, students can participate in
Yep,
this
it was
as
sent to
well.
all of our students who are on our listserv, which is mostly our secondary kids.
So I'm trying to figure out why I wouldn't have gotten an email about this. And so, which just leads to me to a question about sort of making sure the representativeness of it. So,
You didn't get the email that was sent out today? Is that what you're saying?
actually, if it came out today.
It was
We
today.
would not have.
Oh, okay, then I don't know. Okay, so I given the amount of responses, I thought it had been out for a few days. So I'll
it's
look
only
and
been
see.
out since 3.
Yeah, okay,
But he
all
had
right.
sent it out to the faculty,
Staff,
the staff
yeah.
previously.
Okay,
So those might be staff.
that makes sense. Yeah, because I think that's where And it looks like it's going to close in 6 days?
That's the current deadline set up on it. That can be extended.
Okay.
Yeah, when
'Cause
he initially set it up, it's on
Yeah.
a 6-day window.
Yeah, because I want to figure out a
Or 7-day
way to
window.
make sure it's communicated to even to folks who like that listserv. That's a big listserv, but like, do we want to put a little ad in the papers? Do we want Mr. Acosta to write a letter to the editor? I'm trying to think of ways to make sure that
Sure.
it's yeah, that it is distributed widely. Yeah. Okay.
Senior Center, the Cold Spring Fire Department.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I really do like the idea, like, of the Senior Center as well, because those are probably people who've been, may not be. But I think actually if you put it in the papers, you're going to get a lot of people. I think everybody,
Right.
both the papers reads that. I think the other thing I wanted to state is, like, how a process is framed so influences what the result is. And I really, the framing, when you look at my memory, and I don't know if I have this right, but I feel like the framing question in the 2014-15 process was like, what do we want the graduates of 2030, basically, what do we want them to have experienced, or something like that? And under those circumstances, it was it was very, very broad. And I have a lot of respect for how this process is being framed. I mean, I think what came out of the last strategic plan, while very, very comprehensive, did accurately represent a wide variety of wishes and hopes for the kinds of experiences that our children would have. And I respect that, but I do really love those 5 sort of framing, goals for learning, teaching and learning, like very much grounded in learning, also recognizing systems of support and external factors, so not really recognizing that the school exists in the context of the culture, but I like it. I like it a lot.
I would just say one more thing. It wasn't clear in the letter that it was closing in 6 days.
No,
Maybe
it's
clear.
not.
Okay.
It's just you have to, when you use a platform like this, you have to put a deadline in.
Okay, fine, great,
It can be extended.
fine, great.
So I know it's up there. I
Yeah.
noticed that myself. I haven't talked to Jonathan about it. This will not be closed in 6 days. It will be extended beyond that.
But also a driving factor for get it in now.
Sure.
Will
Well,
lead people
that's-
to not kick it
there
down
you
the
go,
road.
John. We're putting it out there for people to see. They're gonna wait.
home.
They're gonna wait for the extension, but you can always give people more time.
Right.
So.
The other thing I'd ask really quickly is, one thing you mentioned at the beginning was I think you mentioned that he evaluated the existing strategic plan?
He examined it, yep.
Okay.
He provided some comments on it during our first session. We had our first session last week. In the background, he provided
Would you want to
his-
characterize those comments or no? Okay.
I think it's not to, I think he would draw the distinction, and I don't want to speak for Jonathan, but what you saw was the result of what often happens with traditional strategic planning. You get a lot of goals, and you end up periodically losing sight of doing some things well because you stretch yourself too thin. And those things you probably alluded to at some point as being most important for students in the work, you could only contribute so much energy to that because you were trying to give attention to other goals areas that maybe, in the grand scheme of things, aren't as important as what you would have identified as being most important in the process. Looking at and something that can happen in strategic planning, traditional strategic planning as well, is you get to a point where 3 or 4 years into the process where that initial energy is kind of dwindled, where you end up almost justifying all of your work as fitting within one of those broad 10 goal areas. For us it was 10. Some districts end up with 20. He really cautioned us, against that, and thus the process he facilitates is really driven by the skills and attributes we want to see all of our students walk away with Not to say that we're not going to become engaged in other work along the way, but making sure you don't lose sight of keeping the main thing the main thing. That resonated, I think, with many of the, certainly the staff members in the room, certainly in the era that we're in right now in education, where you seem to get pulled in a lot of directions. And I think we all have a little bit of anxiety that are we given the necessary attention to the 3 or 4 things we would agree we want all of our students walking away with as a result of their education here.
And I'm paraphrasing here, but what he also seemed to impress, I felt like what I was impressed by was he said, we're going to determine 2, 3 top things that we absolutely must make sure each of our students have when they walk out of these doors. And we as a community are going to get behind those, say, 3 goals. And that might mean that other things aren't as priorities anymore. We also have to be willing to say, these are our priorities, and they will drive our decision-making process, and that might mean other things don't become priorities anymore, and we're all going to have to be okay with that. Right. But it was like, you're a failure. We will be failures if we don't give our kids these 3 things when they graduate. And so there was a real push to focus, which was exciting.
Great.
Yeah.
One other question to either one of you. Have either of you talked to a superintendent or administrator of a district who has gone through this process and is now a year out and said, okay, I'm assuming they provided good feedback on the process itself and the engagement, but what did they learn? What would they have done differently? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so not necessarily a Haldane, right? When you say district level administrator. Yep.
Yeah,
I spoke to Dr. O'Connell at Croton Harmon. She's their superintendent, and she went through the process, or they went through the process, I believe 3 years ago, under Jonathan's facilitation.
Yeah.
And I also spoke with Dr. Henning, who was at Brewster, is now down at Hastings. She also went through the process with Jonathan as part of their work, and I believe that was, I don't want to misspeak, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago or so as well. Both of them I spoke to about the process, and then also as a reference check. Right? Yeah. So, because they were sharing their work with other area superintendents and the journey they had been on through this process. Yeah. And I picked up on some key themes that I thought were really relevant for us and where we are in our particular journey here. As far as their learning, they really stress the importance of being prepared to say no to certain things as a result of this process, and that can really catch people off guard, and school communities off guard, because we're used to saying yes. That's, I think, by our nature we're very empathetic individuals, and that's something that, as Jen just said, you have to be prepared for. Both spoke to the process facilitation itself and things looking back that they would want to make sure they spent a little more time on, or that they spent a lot of time on and didn't feel it was necessary upon reflection to spend so much time on that. So I took good notes when it came to that, and I'm working with Jonathan and that in the background just for us. But every community is different, so you even have to be careful with that. But I have that in the back of my mind when it comes to the facilitation of the process. Those are a few broad thoughts they had shared. I think both are good examples, both districts are good examples where at a governance level, they really are continually referring back to the coherence plan and whether or not the work at a governance level is supporting and contributing to that plan, to the movement, or the direction the district set out to go in, or not, and evaluating the decision making at a governance level with that as the framework. So we'll talk more about that, obviously, as we go further along in the process, but those were some reflections from conversations I had with them back last spring before we engaged. But the thing about Jonathan, and again, he'll be kind of continually in and out of our community over the next few months. Very reputable. He's also worked in North Salem. So I talked to Dr. Freeston there. sorry, I forgot that. North Salem is the furthest along. They're 10 years out from their initial strategic coherence planning work that Jonathan facilitated for them 10 years ago. So all good school districts, some profile very differently in some ways than Haldane, some which profile very similarly to Haldane. So I was interested in that, and but all spoke to being really pleased with the facilitation, but also saying it's really up to us after it's all done. Well, the first part's done. When you're done, the work's just begun. To really hold it as the basis for our work now moving forward, and holding each other accountable for that.
Yeah, certainly. It could be really interesting, a case study of both the analysis and then the how do you execute on that over the course of time. Okay.
I would say, though, we're lucky in that we have 3 districts fairly local to us that have done a very good job of keeping the coherence plan at the fore of their leadership, of their governance, and done some great work with it. Some work that we're collaborating on with those districts now in other ways on. So as a result of their work through the coherence plan, it's only going to help us in the next stages. Because I think what you can see is, in my experience has been, when you really kind of step back and ask yourself this question, what do we want our kids walking away with? More often than not, we want, no matter what the community is, we want the same thing for our kids.
Right.
You know, we want them to be able to think critically. We want them to have good habits of mind and heart. We just need to create this space to become connected to that again, because we get so caught up in the routine. So when you look at Brewster's plan and you look at Croton's plan and you sit down and talk to North Salem, in many ways they're defining the very same things. And it's not because of Jonathan. It's just when you give yourself that space, more often than not, we have the same hopes and dreams for our kids. So that's just something that stood out to me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yep. Is okay if any questions about this, and then I'll hop back into the presentation about the thought exchange. I'll send it to the board separately just to make sure the board has it. So John, Sean, and Jen, it'll be probably the second time you'll get it, but I want to make sure Peggy gets it and that it hit. Chris, can you go back into our presentation? Thank you. And can you just hit the present button up there in the upper right, Chris? There you go. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. You can. So again, this is where we are in the thought exchange. We will use this tool more than once. So we'll use it at least twice to engage the community at different phases in the process. So I think this is a good example of a different way of engaging the community that maybe we relied on in the past. As I alluded to when John and I were talking there for a moment, there will also be a community forum or forums for Jonathan to explain the process and also to engage the community who wants to come in and talk among each other and with our facilitator about where we are in that particular phase of the process and provide their perspective. Right now, Jonathan and I have set aside October 21st for this, for multiple sessions throughout the day to accommodate work schedules. Some of our folks work second shifts, so we have some morning sessions set up. Some of our folks work during the day, so we have evening sessions set up. So Jonathan right now will be here on the 21st. I haven't communicated this yet broadly. I just wanted the board to be aware of that. And there will be multiple sessions throughout the day, and we may add additional ones depending on how those fill up and if we feel that there's more of a demand for additional days for Jonathan to be here. And again, I want to reiterate, we're right here in phase 1, so we're collecting a lot of information right now. That information eventually will be turned over to the core coherence team and looking at, okay, what are our community's thoughts and perspectives? How do they match with the thoughts and perspectives of the individuals in the room? How do they match with the systems that we currently have in the place for our students here in the district? Where is there a gap? Where do we start to see a need? If critical thinking really comes through, one, what does that mean? Because that can be fairly innocuous, and what that means for a kindergartner versus a senior in high school is very different. How do we resolve that among each other and incorporate that into our planning to make sure something like critical thinking skills or strong critical thinking or analytical skills is something we're guaranteeing for every student in our school district upon commencement. That becomes the good grist for the learning mill in our work as we move forward. And this is where we will get into the real planning element of the process. So just some key dates that are upcoming. The planning overview meeting occurred a few days ago. The community invitation and the thought exchange, it says September 16th. It was supposed to go out yesterday. It went out today. October 21st, the community forum, which will be facilitated by Jonathan. Throughout, at some point we anticipate right now in October, a second engagement of the community with the thought exchange. That'll probably be towards the latter part of October. That's somewhat variable depending on the work that occurs between now and then. And we anticipate having the coherence plan finalized towards the end of the winter as of right now. So a lot's going to occur. There's many more dates I could list here. I didn't want to be exhaustive, but the process essentially now is kicked off and we're starting. And I hope what you'll see is that there's multiple opportunities for community engagement via the platform or via community forum. Also, in the subcommittee work that's going to occur, there may be additional community members who are brought on at that point if we feel there's a relative expertise for a particular subgroup. I think in the end, we'll have a document that's pretty reflective of the community's values for our schools, and the board and the administration and our school system will be able to utilize for future years. If there's any other questions, I want to leave time to answer those. But okay. Mr. Salem, thank you. I'll come out of that, Chris. Don't worry about it. There's other documents.
Okay, we're going to move into the information reports. Ms. Jammin. Ms. Jammin's first information report to the board. Welcome.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here for my first report with you. I transitioned in over the summer and got to meet with a lot of different groups, families, and students, which was just, it's a pleasure to be back in the community. So thank you to everyone here and all of our community members for that. Certainly the most enjoyable part, I outlined a lot of them in the report to you, but the most enjoyable part of settling in and transitioning has been over the last week as I visited all of the classrooms and met with all of the students. During those meetings, we were able to talk about our commitments to each other and also roll out a way we're going to be recognizing students for the things they do with each other that promote growth and relationships and kindness throughout the building. So elementary students should be coming home talking about marigolds and how marigolds are helping flowers and how they too can be helpers in their school. I wish I didn't have to talk about dismissal, but I would be remiss if we didn't address the other thing that's been going on at the elementary, which is that there were some safety concerns with previous dismissal procedures that had to be fixed. Our first plan at that ran into a number of logistical problems that made the plan quite unacceptable both to me and to families. The current plan we have going is still running into some logistics in that it's new. For example, Friday was quite slow because the staff members that had been doing the check-in were absent. So the teachers who were there and usually getting to know families, recognizing people, not needing to check ID to the same extent, weren't present. And while I very much appreciate the staff member who took over, it meant that she had to check every ID of every person on the line, and it took quite a long time. So things like that we are working on, and as we get more practice with the procedure, hopefully that will speed up. We'll have more staff members trained and who will recognize families so we don't run into that every time somebody is absent. I also was able to meet with a number of families who were concerned with Dr. Benante last Thursday, and we are exploring whether there are options that can return the sense of community that families felt when they were able to talk to a teacher at the end of the day and able to have that face-to-face. That is it possible to maintain that, but also address the safety concerns? So I'm asking for patience while we maintain the current procedure, but investigate if there's a balance that can find that middle ground and do both. So that's what's going on in the elementary school, and it's been a good start to the year other than those final few minutes of the day.
Thank you.
Yeah, any questions for Christine?
Thanks. Dr. Silky.
Good evening, everyone. So elementary school is coming home talking about marigolds, and hopefully the middle schoolers are coming home talking about True Blue. Through much of last year, I shared with the board the process of developing collaboratively with teachers, students, and families our middle school slogan. Haldane Middle School is True Blue, True being an acronym for teamwork, responsibility, understanding, and excellence. And I couldn't be more impressed with our school community as they've embraced the rollout of True Blue this September, which includes signage, a different way of welcoming the students, explicit instruction in how to reach those character attributes and expectations that take place in context. So cafeteria lessons, bus lessons, and classroom lessons, and hallway lessons on how to be True Blue in all of those unique areas of the school. At the faculty meeting today, our faculty wrote the first round of True Blue postcards, where they spontaneously recognized a student who had exhibited some True Blue attributes and sent a postcard home to them. So those will be happening throughout the year, along with some other really nice plans for positively reinforcing when we see our students living up to these universal expectations we've collaboratively set forth for ourselves. So really excited about Haldane Middle School being True Blue. I also want to mention that yesterday, another thing I'm very excited about, and since critical thinking was like, I wish I had one of those clickers, it probably was said 25 times during the talk on the coherence planning. I had mentioned at the end of last year that in a conversation on looking at our curriculum, a collaboration has developed between Haldane, North Salem, Croton, and Pleasantville. And that collaboration is now developed to the extent that 8th grade teams of teachers met yesterday at Croton. Thank you, Croton, for hosting us. And it was wonderful to see 4 teams of teachers come together, and they were tasked with brainstorming to develop a collaborative project that we could work on in an inter-district, interdisciplinary fashion. So that planning is going to be going on through this current school year. And we also were able to agree on a rubric for assessing the portion that we're going to assess in an inter-district fashion. And it's a critical thinking rubric. So much more to come on that project. Very exciting. Thank you.
Ms. Sniffen?
In meeting with the students, I had the opportunity to meet with each high school social studies class over the first week of the school year. We spent a lot of time being ever present in our classrooms, in our family lives, in our clubs and different activities that we are a part of. I think it was a well-received message to the high school students. In addition to that, as promised, we went over the changes in the code of conduct. We also, the freshmen got to see the new Haldane experience and how to make the most of their high school experience. We shared that 7-minute video, and hopefully at some point I'll have a chance to share that with all of you. And I needed to bring to light some of the current research and some of the current science that we're seeing on the vaping epidemic across our nation. So I did take some time in each of the high school classes, 9th through 12th grade, to kind of talk about that. And how do we support our classmates if we think we have somebody who's addicted to nicotine already? How do we get them the supports they need to stop something that we are now seeing the true dangers of come to light? And that, you know, there are places where you are not going to just get suspended if you come and you ask for help. And so I thought that was a message that needed to be heard to our students. Also, tonight, we kicked off our college process with our financial aid night. The FAFSA paperwork and portal opens on October 1st, senior parents. I'm thankful to Continuing Ed for sending us free of charge a representative for that presentation. So I would highly recommend, we will post it on our website. If you didn't get a chance to go and you're a senior parent, please check out the website. If you are a junior parent, I hope to see you next year at that event. And finally, we had our club fair last week, which is our 3rd annual club fair. And from that, we have 3 interest groups now. So they're not considered full clubs. We have the astrophysics interest group, which started last year a little bit with Mr. Lynch. We have a programming club with Miss Granisi, and we have not club, interest group, sorry, and we have a culinary interest group with Mr. Doherty. So all of them are willing to be an interest group. It's not an official club and part of the contract, and there's no payment yet. So we'll see how this interest moves forward and if it will become a club in future years. Thank you.
Thank you.
How does that interest group become a club? There's some, you need a certain number of
Yes.
something.
So,
something.
An interest group,
Yeah.
in its first year, they need to maintain membership of 10 or more students. They need to keep track of their meetings, which a minimum of once a month. They need to develop a mission. They can start to establish a president and a secretary. It doesn't have to. They don't have to do that with an interest group, and they have to have a faculty or staff member offer to oversee the interest group for a couple years before they can bring forth a full proposal to become a club. If they wanted to become a recognized club, it would need to, 1, be negotiated for an advisor, and 2, that would obviously then need to go to the Board of Ed for approval.
How many clubs are there now? Do you know?
There's a lot. I think right now we have 23 active clubs.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's quite a few.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Rounds.
Hi, good evening. So first, what I'd like to say is just how pleased I am that I've had the opportunity already to meet with parents and teachers who have come in and had conversations with me about the PPS department and talk about some of our strengths and what they see as really positive parts of the department, and also share some of their thoughts about areas of growth and possible areas where we may need to have some changes. And it's been very helpful and valuable experience, so I look forward to that continuing as the year goes on and continuing to meet with parents and teachers and other staff members. Next, secondly, I'd like to highlight our work that our counseling team is doing. This work started last year with a pilot program in dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, informed practices in schools. And what DBT informed practices involves, it's a pretty comprehensive initiative that they're working on, in that counselors are meeting with groups of students to teach skills in counseling groups, skills such as mindfulness, interpersonal communication skills, emotional regulation skills, and then what they're doing is meeting with these students on an ongoing basis to monitor those skills and see how they're using those skills. In addition, some of our teachers have been trained and are learning the language, so that's being carried over, particularly in our health classes, where there's a focus on mental health now as well. What the counselors are doing as a team is they are having these individual groups at the different levels, but then they meet weekly together as a team, and they troubleshoot, and they have coaching twice a month. They have a coach come in from Dr. Alec Miller's group, Cognitive Behavioral Consultants, and they receive feedback, they ask questions, they talk about how things are going and how they can problem solve together. And I just wanted to thank that team because they really hit the ground running this year. Like I said, it was a pilot program last year, and now they're jumping right into it, and I hope to see that program expand in all of the buildings this year. Thank you. Yeah.
Just a quick question, and maybe a quick question for both. I'm just going to say DBT because I'm not going to be able to talk. Is that our things within your purview also fall under the curriculum overview over the course of the year?
It could. There's so much overlap now. I would say typically, though, DBT would be an area that I would say would fall under the pupil personnel director's leadership.
Okay.
But the essence of what was identified as a skill gap,
Yeah.
right, and a need to target that and those students with additional support by way of training our teachers and identifying which teachers or which educators would be the best group to enter into that work is very similar to what we want to occur through curricular program reviews. This one is just very specific to students who profile as having a very certain set of needs. In this case, as opposed to all students, even though every student would benefit from this sort of work. I think you're definitely on the right page with that.
Thank you.
Mr. Salem.
So good evening, everyone. Just wanted to briefly mention homecoming weekend. It's coming up this Friday and Saturday. Friday night, we have several events. We have our varsity volleyball team playing at 4:30 at home. We have our varsity tennis team playing at 4 o'clock at home. And then we have our varsity football teams at 7 o'clock. So please come out and support all our student athletes Friday night. And then Saturday, we continue our festivities with our boys and girls soccer programs. Our boys are playing at 11 o'clock and our girls are at 1:30. So it's going to be a fun, eventful weekend. Come out, show your Blue Devil pride. We also have our pep rally Friday, which is always a good time at the high school. So please come out and support all of our Haldane athletes. And then Mrs. Sniffen already mentioned the high school club fair. We're getting the Student Athletic Advisory Council back up and running. We did it my first year. We had about 24 kids, I believe, sign up. Tomorrow's our first meeting. So really looking for more input from our students about our athletic program and kind of ways to improve things and just teach them about leadership, being a good teammate, sportsmanship, all the things our coaches already are doing, but using our students to really be leaders in the school and just carry that message throughout their individual teams and programs. So another exciting thing that hopefully I'll have more information throughout the year to present about. So fun weekend coming up, so please come out. Like I said, a lot of activities. Everything's posted on the Haldane website. Hopefully you could join me this weekend because I'll be here all weekend. Thank you. Friday, September 20th, and Saturday, September 21st. And then Sunday, September 22nd is our Hall of Fame brunch. It's not too late to sign up if anyone's interested. Just visit our website. Thank you.
Thank you, administrators, for your reports. In the past at board meetings, sometimes after the reports, you're, excused. I feel like I'm not going to do that. But if at any time you ever want to leave, we will never take it personally. Okay? So you have full agency.
Thank you.
Okay, going into the communication from the public, we have a little blurb here I'm going to read as we get used to this new protocol. The Haldane Board of Education desires and values input from the entire school community. For those who wish to address the board, please sign in and state your name for the record. Please keep your remarks to 3 minutes or less. Disparaging remarks and discussion of district personnel are prohibited. Although we do not engage in dialogue, we are listening. Please leave your contact information with our district clerk, Ms. Julia Famularo, for prompt follow-up from the board president or superintendent. Is there any public comment as this time? Okay, going into consent agenda minutes. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
It's the minutes from our September 3rd meeting. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda personnel. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Going into unfinished business, the district goals. We started talking about these last meeting. So Dr. Benante, I'll turn it over to you if you have any further comments about them.
Not really. The goals, I didn't hear from the board last meeting a desire to revise these in any significant way. So they're listed here and in the content as they have been for the last 2 weeks. So with that, I would say if there's no further request for edits in any way, I would recommend that we move to now adopt them for the school year so I can begin communicating them, even though I probably have already.
Okay, may I have a motion, please?
Oh, can I have a quick comment? I think something I mentioned.
You did
that-
mention the order of them.
No, I don't care about the order. You do
You
whatever
said
order
last
you want.
time
I
that
know,
you
no,
thought
I'm
number
s-
two.
You
I
actually
come
very
before
clearly
one.
had an issue with the order.
I didn't. I've made a suggestion. Suggestions are made to be
Okay.
disregarded. Actually, what I would like, however,
Write that down.
is
Suggestions are made to
suggestion.
be
I have no
disregarded.
authority. Is that, and it's up for discussion. I would love if at the end of one, to say culminating in a new strategic plan.
Yes.
Just as a, what are we going to get out of it? Because I know what we're going to get out of two. I know
You
what
did
we're
mention
gonna,
that last time,
okay,
John. I'm sorry.
But if we think that that's not appropriate,
No,
I
it's
think it's
good.
like at the end of the year we're going to have a new strategic coherence plan. Sorry.
Are you guys okay approving it with the edit pending? Is that okay,
Yes.
so we can get it moving?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
well, it says
You're not
be it
voting.
resolved right here.
No, it's not.
I
Aren't
have
we
it
on
as
I, unfinished business?
letter I.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. You're
Are we
right.
good? Okay.
There's a lot of goals on this agenda.
Sorry, yeah,
Yeah,
there's,
it's a
there's two
different
sets
document.
of goals, you're right. Okay, may I have a motion? Go ahead.
Oh, well, we can go ahead and, and maybe we want to save it to next time, but when having the goals, I also want to have a conversation about a timeline for a mid-year evaluation
Yeah.
and end-of-year evaluation, and it seemed like this would be an okay time to bring that up, and I don't know, one of my concerns I remember last year was we got kind of, budget season starts, and it was also my first time running the superintendent evaluation, and so I learned a lot, but I don't know the best way for setting up that timeline. I don't know if it necessarily needs to be, handled in the public meeting, but definitely, yeah. Timeline.
And I'm wondering if the board goals being evaluated will be addressed in our board evaluation retreat. Like, I wonder if evaluating our goals is part of that evaluation process. And I don't know the answer to that. I'm just wondering out loud. But we can look at it. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Would you like me to read the resolution?
Sorry, I need to make a motion and get us there first? No?
I
Oh,
can
go
read
ahead and read the resolution. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the following district goals for 2019-2020.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Any further discussion? We're gonna have the edit. We're gonna have the edit in motion. We're gonna look at evaluating when we should evaluate. We're gonna talk about when we should evaluate ourselves on goals, both the superintendent and ourselves. Setting up a timeline for that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
'Cause
I
I think
think, respectfully, I recall last year Peggy being mindful of there's some timeline, due dates, if you will, established in my contract, and wanting to make sure that the work that would need to be completed leading up to that due date or time frame being honored would need to be planned out somewhat in advance, both for me and for the board.
Right. And
which is
because
fine,
because that deadline, which is I think like the beginning of June,
It is.
comes
It
right
sneaks
after.
up on you. It's a very busy time of the year.
Just because it comes right at the very end of the
Yep.
whole budget process,
Right.
and so I actually feel personally, and the other on the board can say, I'm very open to having Phil look at what for the mid-year and the end of year, sort of what timeline works for him in terms of when he would want to have the mid-year evaluation, and then we could plan around that, because I think what we'd probably want to do is then have a discussion before we met with Phil at that mid-year evaluation, and then
Sure.
also sort of if he gives us sort of like, yeah.
I think it's an evidence-based process in many ways, especially the mid-year. So if it's okay with the board, I'll look at the date that's outlined. I'll think about some of the evidence because this work's being facilitated. All of it's on different timelines. But I'll sit back and take a look at that and then recommend something to the board for the board's consideration. Obviously, I'll defer to the board on it, and I'll have that ready for you for our next meeting, or I'll give it to Jen, and
Perfect.
she can take care of it with
Thank
the board.
you. That
Great.
seems like a good process.
Thanks, Peggy.
Sure. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, CSE, CPSE recommendations. Ms.
Okay.
Famularo.
Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the recommendations of the committees on special education and preschool special education as presented.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
The approval of the Haldane Central School District Safety and Emergency Management Plan for 2019-2020. Ms. Famularo.
Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the Haldane Central School District Safety and Emergency Management Plan for 2019-2020.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, Board of Education goals. This is something we've been working on a bit behind the scenes and at our retreat, but it'll be the.
Do tax roll first?
The tax warrant.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Ms. Famularo.
Oh, sorry. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the following resolution to confirm the corrected tax rolls, reauthorize the tax levy, and approve the revised tax warrant for the 2019-2020 school year.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Now we get to talk about our Board of Education goals. Okay, so they're up here for the public to see for the first time. We've been talking about them at our retreat and trying to firm them up in some text. Our two goals for the year are dealing with our policy manual. We have our policy manual audit. For the discussion of the board, this is something that there was some feedback on about trying to make it as specific as possible without really knowing how it's going to go. So we took kind of some guesses here, so we'll see how it goes over the course of the year. But basically, we'll be trying to approve and implement our updated policy manual. We're hoping to have our policy manual back for Mary Bosey sometime in December or January. Once that's approved and implemented, then we'll start going through it in a rigorous process, hopefully about 100 pages of policy a year. So this year will be a bit of a push because we don't really have the whole year to get there. But that's okay. We can do a push. And then it's about a 500-page book.
That's a little more than that, maybe, but I think it's
500-ish.
Both sides?
not double space.
It's not always double-sided, yeah. So over the course of 5 years, we'll hopefully have gone through the whole manual, and then we get to start again. So it's just a constant process, really. And then in the midst of that, we're dealing with adding in anything that comes up, right? Legislative changes, stuff that comes up from our community or needs in our school district. So that's the plan. We'll see how it works this year. And then our second goal is the self-evaluation tool, which I mentioned earlier. Step one is just figuring out how to use it, which we'll be doing with Garrison at the end of November. And then we hope to implement it. I assume it'll be kind of parallel to the superintendent evaluation. And hopefully we get some constructive dialogue amongst ourselves to be even more effective.
And actually, I guess the one thing I would say about the policy manual audit
Yeah.
goal,
Yeah.
and I feel like I learned this from Dr. Benante when we were talking to him about his evaluation last year, was that, and this goal is written that way, is to begin to make this process be, to develop a process that is ongoing and sustained. I mean, I feel like it is a sustainable goal. It's not nearly as ambitious as like aligning the entire curriculum K-12. But that's really it. I mean, we haven't had a practice starting from before I was on the board, this practice of doing this. And so the 100 pages a year is really like, you know, the recommendation is to go through it every 5 years. And so it's like 500 divided by 5. I mean, so I think that's really it. And I mean, just to make sure the public knows, I mean, one of the changes in the policy manual that Erie Boses is reviewing right now, revising, I guess, based on our initial read of it, is adding a policy committee to one of the board's standing committees, which I think is really is really important. So yeah.
Yeah, this has been a goal kind of coming for a couple of years. We've been laying the foundation. And now we're ready to tackle it.
And it is ambitious for this year, but I actually
Yeah.
think that's appropriate. I mean, I think it's a.
I've got work
Sorry
to
that
do.
Phil has to do it while he's also working on.
It's okay. I
budget.
enjoy our policy committee meetings.
They're fun.
They're
It
fun.
actually is kind of nice. So anyway, that's all.
Okay, so I don't see a resolution on this. Is this just something that we can kind of motion and?
Yes,
Okay.
or you want me to just, on the fly, make up a resolution?
Make up a
Okay.
resolution on the fly.
All right, so be it resolved that the Board of Education adopts its its Board of Education goals for 2019-2020 as presented.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
A second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Workshop topics.
Technology update is on there.
Yes.
The board's wanted a technology
yes.
update.
Let's make sure it
workshop
doesn't move or get
You're gonna
changed
get it.
or get
so many
pushed.
years.
Exciting.
So,
Go ahead.
okay, sorry, I was up. I
You're
may have
on.
missed something. So this is reflective of some of the work we started last year. I did incorporate a few things, so I'll just talk through them. One, starting with the October meeting, maybe a good opportunity if the board's interested, just to see some of our building goals. So I'd like the board to see the connection between our district goal and then how that manifests in the building goals and department goals that our administrators set for their schools or their departments respectively. This is not an intention to get into every one, but just to draw some delineation here between what we've adopted now as district goals and the work that's going to be going on in the buildings throughout the year. The technology update is something I think Peggy alluded to, has been requested by the board in the past. We want to make sure we provide that to the board this school year. I have curriculum update in there for December. Quite frankly, I do think I'm going to have Judy provide a report to the board, Judy Barbera, who's our BOCES specialist, with us essentially on a part-time basis this year prior to that date, so we can talk through that. If it may be great just to hold it as a separate workshop topic. That's the one I'm a little less clear about right now. It's an anticipated topic. Then when we get into January, we start to get into budget development. There should be a separate special education update provided to the board as part of the budget development process, but also well, I shouldn't say as part of the budget development process, just should be a special education update provided to the board each year. I would envision this occurring right around the time when we're going to talk about a anticipated special education budget for the upcoming school year. Then we get into our detail reports for each of the schools. It should say high school detail report with athletics detail report. If we want to combine walkthrough with each of these reports at some point around that time as well, as we discussed earlier this evening. That's fine. So we have the 3 detailed reports listed. We have the budget vote in May, so we've always reserved that meeting in that way with no real additional workshop being provided, given everything that's going on in school that day. And then I have June as the strategic planning and enrollment study report, but that's the one where I'm thinking we might actually, I may swap out something there to do that, or to do those earlier, depending on when they're done. I'm pretty sure the strategic coherence planning process will be complete in late winter. So I wouldn't want to wait until June to provide the report to the board. So we may tack that on as an additional workshop topic in one of those winter meetings. Similar with the enrollment study. I don't have a clear sense. I know it will be completed by the end of the year, but the exact date, I'm not yet sure. When it's complete, I may bring that up for a separate, to an earlier date, because I don't want there to be a lag on something like that. So, I think everything's in as a placeholder right now. There may be some variability, but this is to provide the board with an overview of the anticipated workshop topics and your feedback if there's anything you'd like to see changed or included.
Seems like having and you've already alluded to the fact that you want to move it earlier, but having the strategic planning in particular earlier and before the budget's
But too much of the
finalized
budget
is
development.
really, it seems really critical.
Yep.
And yet you also want to make sure, providing the detailed reports, I think, is a significant event for each of the administrators. So we want to make sure they also have plenty of time to know when that's coming up.
Right.
So, yep. Looks
I
good.
think we'll stay tuned.
Yeah, so
as things
rough
develop,
outline
but it
for
looks
now.
good.
And I think there was a situation or two last year where I added a report in. Needs arise. The board sometimes wants more information on a particular topic that is unanticipated as of September 17th, but may come up throughout the course of the school year. So I think this gives us enough of a basis for our planning, and then as other needs arise or work is completed, we'll move some things around.
If they're, I don't know, how did these get developed last year? Was there an opportunity for input or things that we might want to hear? Or was there this is what I'm going to talk about in a couple weeks, rough agenda kicking out? Or like in special education, only because my eyes, like, here are the 5 things I'm going to talk about.
I think
If the board says, well, I'd really like to hear about something else.
I don't think we discussed ahead of time what the content of the reports would include.
Yeah.
I think there was somewhat of the board deferred to me.
Okay.
In many cases, these were reports that had not historically been, I don't think had been provided in previous years,
Yep.
like the detail reports for the buildings. So it was more of an exploration and see what
Okay.
is of it. And I was kind of going off of the feedback I heard from last year's reports as a basis of planning for this year.
Okay.
But I would say, totally open to if there are specific elements, something like special education, for example, is very nuanced. You can go
Deep.
really deep into that, or a specific element of it, or you could stay very broad on it.
I'm thinking technology as well. It's like
Technology as well.
this
So,
is-
and the technology one's a new one,
Right.
meaning that there's no real basis that I see for how that report will be provided. I'll just, so if you have specific questions that you'd like to be included
Okay.
as a reference point
Okay.
for what we present, please do so. I would say a couple
Everyone's
weeks
like,
in advance.
24 hours?
No, so the meeting prior,
yeah.
right? The business
Okay,
meeting
that's fine.
prior, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Our internal goal for any of these reports is that they're completed a week before.
Okay.
So that gives us a week
Backup.
to really, right.
Sure.
If you're bringing it up 2 weeks before to incorporate that, we're probably,
Yeah.
generally my experience with the board has been that the questions you have are, questions we have available
Yeah,
to
right,
us
right.
are relatively easy. And if they're not, I'll say to you, that's going to take
gonna take a
a long time.
that's
And I
fair.
think there would
That's
be
totally fair.
respect for that, so.
Absolutely fair. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks.
All right, going into the NYSSBA advocacy update. So this is something that happens annually. This is the first time as a board that I'm aware of that we're really discussing it as a board. But Peggy brought it up as something that we might want to discuss as a board, because we do, as members of NYSSBA, if we're not at the meeting to vote, we kind of default to them. But we don't have to, and we have until September 20th, which is Friday, if we want to make any comments about what they're proposing as their resolutions. And so Peggy, because Peggy's had the pleasure the last 2 years, we've gone to the conferences, and each school selects, I think, just one person to be their voting delegate, and they get to go to the meeting. And Peggy has generously spent her time doing that. It's like an all-day affair. And so because she has had the opportunity to do that and really kind of knows it from the inside out, Peggy's going to present the information for us, give us a little overview.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I see this sort of as like board PD, because to be honest, until the year that we first went to the NYSSBA convention, and then I was nominated to go to the resolutions, the annual meeting, and the resolutions meeting, I really didn't know anything about this process, because as a board, it wasn't something that we had really ever paid much attention to in the time that I had been on. And yet I think, and that may be something we decide not to do in the future, but I think it's at least important that we all know what it is. And I thought me telling you about it would be easier than something else. So the New York State School Boards Association, definitely we're really aware of all the ways that it supports us as school boards. So the training, information if you're thinking about running, the monthly paper that we get, the weekly, daily emails that we get about news stories, the training if you want to use it after you become a board member. But the NYSSBA also serves as the New York State School Board's collective voice in terms of advocating for education-related legislation. So how do they develop what their legislative priorities are? Well, every year there is the meeting at the annual meeting where a bunch of resolutions are presented in front of each representative from each of the school boards. And those resolutions are discussed and voted on. And once a resolution is adopted by the NYSSBA membership, it becomes a NYSSBA priority for 5 years. And then at the end of those 5 years, it's put up again or not. Resolutions that are presented to the membership come from two different places. They come from the NYSSBA Resolutions Committee, and each region has a representative that's on the NYSSBA Resolutions Committee, but it's also possible for school boards to recommend a resolution. And there's a lot of support for school boards that want to do that. And so, yeah, I mean, if you follow NYSSBA closely, I mean, they then take these resolutions and really turn them into their legislative priorities. And they spend a lot of time speaking to the New York State Legislature. So when we've gone in the past, it's been left up to me to vote on behalf of the board. This year, we're not sending anybody to the convention. That's the plan at this point. And so we actually won't, unless somebody wants to go, I guess. And so we won't vote on any of these, but I thought it was a good opportunity just to walk through the process. The document that I had Julia print out for us is kind of a little cheat sheet that if somebody were going this year and we wanted to collectively decide how we wanted our board to vote on the resolutions, we would need to go through these and vote ourselves and then direct our representative. The bigger resolutions package is much longer and includes the full resolution as well as the rationale from the NYSSBA Resolutions Board, for to either, the NYSSBA Resolutions Board either recommends that it be adopted or doesn't recommend that it be adopted. It's fascinating. I mean, I'm not actually a policy wonk, but it is a fascinating meeting because you've got folks from, I'm really not. No, I mean, you've got folks from all over the state having really passionate conversations about these resolutions in this very structured way. I mean, I won't go into the details, but it's a highly structured and very long meeting. And yeah, I mean, so in addition to the resolutions, also the other thing that happens at the annual meeting is they announce like who's been elected to represent different regions. But importantly, that's also where they make changes in the NYSSBA bylaws. And so year before last, there was a very heated discussion. I think it was the third year that had come before the annual meeting to add to the NYSSBA Board of Directors a member from the Black caucus of, I've got the Caucus of Black School Board members. And so the bylaw amendment that's being discussed this year is to make sure that that group is represented on the resolutions committee as well. So anyway, school boards can decide to interact or not interact with NYSSBA in a whole variety of ways. I thought it valuable for this group to begin to consider what our options are in terms of engaging with NYSSBA in a more engaged way. And at the very least, to just remind us, if we're interested, to even take a look at the initial list, the cheat sheet list of resolutions, because it gives you really great insight, I think, into, and then there's the resolutions, and then the other document on the NYSSBA board is actually the full list of all the policy priorities that are based on the resolutions that have been passed over the past 5 years. So that wasn't quite as, that was as brief as I can make it.
And they also share not just their positions, but also the things that they've decided against and why, which I also really appreciated, just to understand the rationale.
Yeah. I mean, last year, and this is a topic I feel very passionate about, but last year there was a resolution about whether NYSSBA was going to support changing the sort of the age of kindergarten entry. Based on my research, I feel very strongly that the age of kindergarten entry should be 5 by September 1st. I think there's really strong evidence for that. That's not a practice in this district. That's not a practice statewide. And there was really there was just really interesting debate around that. And I think that will probably continue to come up. So anyway, yep.
And so
our NYSSBA dollars at work.
Peggy, by not going to,
we do not vote.
We do not vote.
We do not vote.
So it's not that, I don't know, I guess I've always thought of it as by not voting, it's like a default we're in favor, but that's not true.
That's actually was my memory as well, but I confirmed it with NYSSBA before tonight.
Okay.
By not going, we do not have a voice in supporting those resolutions. So it's something to think about in terms of sending or not sending folks to NYSSBA conventions moving forward for this board.
Great. Thank you so much, Peggy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, the final thing to bring up, this is something that Dr. Benante brought up to John and I during our agenda setting meeting last week, and we thought we'd bring it up to everybody to see what you guys thought. But he suggested, and you can chime in here, Phil, at any time, but he suggested at the end of our meetings, after our new business, we could add in board reflections, and that could be this catch-all moment for those things that don't currently have homes, like, oh, I went to the fundraiser and it was so fantastic, or I'd like us to revisit what Ms. Jammin brought up in her report, or what, because sometimes in the moment, when you're seeing something, you might think about it throughout the meeting and you want to add something later and the moment's passed. And also sometimes there's just not an appropriate place for stuff. So that would be the board reflections section. And then the other section that was recommended is something called closing remarks. And that would really be for either the board president or the superintendent And we talked about that as an opportunity for, as we're trying to hone in on our public comment section and not engage in dialogue. But sometimes something's brought up that, Dr. Benante might want to inform people about, or it reminds him of something, and this could be an opportunity to say something, to point people in the right direction, to get more information about a topic that was brought up during public comment, or something else that somebody brought up that he wants to follow up on, or just something he thought of during the meeting that doesn't have a home. I don't know if you had anything else to say
No,
about those
I would
things.
just position it prior to adjournment. So
After
as far as
communication.
after the second communication from the public. And again, I think our board members do a great job of, they're out and about in the community, so interacting with our kids, our staff, other families, so that reflections piece I think is important to capture in there. And sometimes just having it as a standalone segment in the agenda helps just elicit that level of or contributions along those lines. And then the closing remarks, Jen, I think summarized pretty succinctly. So I would just recommend that it sits, so this would be
Under communication
yeah,
from
so
the
it would
public
become
before
L, I
adjournment.
guess, on our agenda.
L, and then
adjournment would be
M, and then
N.
adjournment would be N. Do you guys have any thoughts about that? Does that sound like something you guys want to try? Yes, no?
I like it. I like it.
We can always undo it if we don't like it. Ms. Famularo, do you feel okay about adding that into board docs?
Oh, well, the only
Go ahead.
comment I have is that I think it requires a
Oh, does it?
change to a policy.
There is,
yeah.
we do have a policy, of course.
Do you have to add a policy?
That outlines
Give it to the policy committee. So they can-
structure of the board meeting. I forgot what it exactly is, but essentially designates the components of the board
Yes,
meeting.
it does.
That being said, I think our current agenda structure doesn't quite match with what the initial policy outlined.
Shocking.
So we can talk about it at a policy level. I think what's most important now is that there may be a formal action that has to be taken by the board to change the structure of its meeting to
Okay.
include this.
Okay.
I'd have to look into what process, to make sure we're honoring our policy, because I think the policy outlines if there's a change to the,
This is not something we're doing right now, then.
No, we don't need to do it
Okay.
right now.
not tonight.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
No.
yeah. But if everybody's on board with
We can
giving
examine
it a
how
go,
how to change it.
okay.
All right.
Okay, I think that's it. Is there any more communication from the public? Okay. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.